Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm Sid Frede, who you probably recognize. This is clinic number 3 for the year. We're going to talk about left turning tendencies, or why your airplane goes left, or why it runs off the taxiway when you're trying to take off, especially a tail dragger, and also what's happening in the air sometimes. There's really kind of 4 factors that are primarily responsible for that particular physical action. One of them is the sheer torque of the motor, which is pretty common. We'll talk about that a little bit. The other one is something called P factor, which sometimes is a little mysterious, but I think I've got a good demonstration that kind of shows you what's happening with the propeller. We have spiraling slipstream, which is the rotation of the air around the airplane when you're taking off, striking the rudder. And then we call something called gyroscopic precession. And that's why I have a big tail wheel here today, and we'll demonstrate that and why it has an effect on your plane. We talk about torque, of course, whether it's an electric motor, or whether it's a gasoline motor or a glow motor. When you accelerate, the motor wants to turn quicker, and obviously on most of our airplanes, the propeller turns in this direction. So if you move the throttle slowly and advance the throttle slowly, there's not an impact of force. But if you try to jam the throttle quickly, this propeller wants to turn quickly. The plane's in the air. What does the plane want to do? The plane wants to roll against that force. And what happens? What does that look like? Looks like a left bank aileron turn, doesn't it? So if you're on the runway and you crank the motor hard, the plane is naturally going to want to lean to this side, and that's going to make the plane try to veer off to the left. Whether you're talking about a tail dragger or whether you're talking about a tricycle gear, the effect is somewhat the same. In a tricycle gear, of course, the mains are somewhat behind the CG, so the airplane wants to lean down on the nose wheel. So basically you've got the steering anchor out in front of you, so even though you've got this left turning tendencies from torque, you've got the front of the plane fairly well anchored into the ground with that wheel, and it helps prevent the plane from rolling off to your left. But the tail dragger, that's not the case. The tail dragger, of course, when we crank the torque, the plane wants to roll up this way and go into that left turning type of aileron bank. You'll also notice that more of the weight now is on the left wheel versus the right. If you crank it really hard, you're basically doing a pirouette. You're slamming the airplane up on that left wheel, and now we have a pivot point, and the tail dragger really takes off to the left. So basically, in taking a look at torque from the engine, we want to make sure we accelerate on the taxiway nice and smooth, and don't jam that throttle to try to have that torque factor be a factor in trying to steer the airplane. And there's a little description here, a little diagram on a handout that talks about the torque. P factor is another issue, and P factor sometimes is a little difficult to understand, and they give it a great big name for the P factor, but I just kind of like to think of a propeller factor. And we take a look at a propeller, and we're spinning around in a level flight, and notice the pitch, which you can see by the sticks, is the same, and this particular propeller is probably about a 10 or 12 pitch. Now, as we start to pull a radius, the propeller starts to turn. You'll notice now that this particular side of the propeller has a much steeper pitch than this particular side of the propeller. So this side of the propeller is going to generate more force, and it's going to generate yaw. So what's going to happen as we pull a hard upline, the plane's going to go to this direction because this propeller has more force and wants to drive the plane to the left. And this propeller now on this side basically has no pitch at all. And this propeller on this side, or the downward blade on this side, has a significant amount of pitch. That adds to that tendency of wanting to turn left or changing that particular pitch. When we're flying in the air, once we get up in the air, sometimes you'll see an airplane veer to the left, the pilot gets control of the airplane, gets it into the air, and then crams the throttle. Well, we've already talked about the torque effect. And now if we're up in the air, we start to pull a hard elevator and crank the throttle. We can now see that this has an extreme amount of pitch, so this accelerates our motion to the left. And what you see typically in a tail dragger is a 3-point takeoff. Wingtip, rudder. And this thing bounces off into the left side of the runway. Now we have something called gyroscopic precession, and the propeller is nothing but a spinning wheel. And if you take a look at a spinning wheel, and Jim, can you come do this? Turn my airplane around here so we can this is my propeller. It's spinning. If I have a downward force, look what I put the propeller. Try that again. I'm not going to see that. So if I have a downward force on that rotating propeller, look what happened to my propeller. Off to the left, right? So now, this is what's happening to a tail dragger. So what's the first motion on a tail dragger as you cram the throttle, start to accelerate? Tail comes up, force is going up on the propeller, which is the force we saw here, which causes the wheel to arc to the left. So we got torque. If we cram the throttle, it's going to take us off to the left. We've got P factor. If we cram the throttle, it's going to take us off to the left. And if we have the gyroscopic precession of the propeller, it's going to take us off to the left. So we've added 3 factors into trying to take off an airplane that are opposite to what we want to go. And the fourth one is called spiraling slipstream. Take a look at the aircraft. And take a look at the last figure. As we crank this propeller, we generate a slipstream going around the airplane, coming off the propeller. That slipstream basically winds around the airplane and strikes the side of the rudder. Another factor that makes the plane want to go left. So now we have 4 factors that are working against us and trying to make a smooth takeoff. With the tricycle gear, again, we've got that tricycle gear on the ground in front of us, which kind of acts as a forward anchor that kind of keeps us straight. So we can steer, we can overcome a lot of those negative tendencies and those 4 particular items to overcome that left turning tendency. The tail dragger, that's why some people don't like to fly tail draggers, because you really kind of have to have a feeling for what's happening. You can't jam the throttle and yank the elevator on a tail dragger, thinking, I got to get it off the ground quickly because if I don't, something's going to happen. Well, if you jam the throttle and yank the elevator, you've got torque, you've got P factor, you've got gyroscopic precession, and you've got spiraling slipstream, all working against you, taking the airplane off. And that's why you see so many airplanes, especially tail draggers, crank the throttle, it goes left, goes into the fence, 3-point takeoff, wingtip rudder. So how do you overcome that? In a tail dragger, as well as a tricycle gear, we want to make use of the runway. We have a runway here that's 650 feet long. Very seldom do we use very much of it. The idea is, let's get off the ground quick and let's go fly. With a tail dragger, you have to be more cautious. With a tricycle gear, that gear out in front of us, it helps to override some of those tendencies. But still, the process should be the same, and our takeoff method should be the same. We should accelerate slowly with our throttle, get the plane rolling, so that we can control the plane as far as direction, while the wheels are still on the ground. Continue to ease into the throttle. It's the point the plane will probably won't try to fly by itself. It wants to lift off and fly by itself. So when you get to that point, just ease back on the elevator, and the plane will very slowly take off into the air. Being aware of that, of these 4 factors, can still affect you in tricycle gear. So to overcome that, you need to be ready to kind of put a little right thumb, a little right rudder, if you want to go left a little bit, get it rolling slowly, get it rolling straight, and then worry about continuing to increase the throttle and take off. The tail dragger, it's really critical. And basically, you want to use as much of the runway as possible. And certainly, if you're taking a look at an airplane, whether it's a tricycle gear or whether it's a tail dragger, if you're trying to simulate a scale type of a landing or a scale type of a takeoff, like a 172 rotates at what, about 55? Maybe? 55 ground speed when you talk about rotating to start to lift off. So you've got a substantial forward speed as far as ground speed. You're at the point now where you've got enough airspeed coming across the rudder that you've got an effective control over the rudder. And now you can ease that thing up into the air. Same thing with the tail dragger. You want to roll up thing very smoothly. A little bit of throttle, get it rolling down the runway, kind of get a feeling you got it going straight, continue to increase the throttle. That tail wants to lift off the ground. Once that tail lifts off the ground, you're not done yet. Go ahead and slowly increase the throttle, run that thing on its mains, and you'll find that it'll probably just take off for itself. Slowly ease back on the elevator and gain your altitude. At any point in time along that takeoff, if you're over aggressive on the throttle or you're over aggressive on the elevator, you're going to go left. And in many cases, not only are you going to go left, you're going to see something like that. Because now you've got all those tendencies we've talked about, and now we're janking on the elevator. We've got that P factor involved, so it wants to continue to make that turn, and you wind up in this position, which is totally unrecoverable. and you wind up building another airplane. But one other factor, actually Ron mentioned yesterday, which has nothing to do with those 4 factors, but one thing you can do to help counteract that as well is to put a little toe in your mains. We probably all talked about that a little bit. If you have some toe in the mains, which is the same way that's probably on your car as well as full scale, if you got a little bit of toe in on the mains and it wants to veer to the left, what happens? We've now got one of the wheels that wants to point it straight down the runway, which helps gives us control, which allows us to come back. If it wants to go to the right, we now have the other wheel that kind of points down the runway that gives us control, come back to the left. So when you're setting up an airplane, especially a tail dragger, a little bit of toe in is a very good thing. You know, too much, you get like a braking effect. But if you have any toe out, and the thing wants to go in one direction, it's just going to spin. We're in that ground loop, and it's extremely difficult to take off. So in setting up the airplane, take a look at putting just a little bit of toe in when you set up the mains. That will help you stabilize on the ground, and be concerned about advancing the throttle slowly and pulling back on the elevator slowly, and being prepared to kind of feather that right thumb a little bit down the runway to keep it straight down the runway. The plane was going to lift off by itself. Nice and smooth.
There were some people put that in out here, and they do use the rudder, but when they get off the ground, they don't get off of it quick enough, and they take that wing dip all the time.
It's every airplane's a little different, and that's why it's good to make a lot of use of the runway. Let it run down the runway quite a ways, and even the point, and we'll do a little demo over here with this particular plane. But, you know, you can go pretty much the entire length of the runway without setting up one's mains at some type of a idle or throttle, basically, and increase the throttle just a little bit, and it'll just gently lift off. You won't have any tendencies to veer left or veer right. It looks like kind of a scale takeoff, nice and smooth. And then once you've got some airspeed and some altitude, then you can jump on the throttle or whatever you're going to do, because you're well away from the runway.
Why is a Cub worse than other?
Cub is a very short coupled airplane, and you'll find that the gear is fairly close to the front end of it, and you've got a fairly well, who's the Cubby guy? You're a Cubby guy.
Now, the landing gear on tail draggers, you need to have like at least 80% of the weight of the plane on the main gear. And most models, when like a Cub, you know, when you scale down a full-scale airplane, you tend to put the landing gear where the full scale was, and that's way too far forward. So you wind up with a whole bunch of weight on the tail, and once the tail gets going, you're screwed. You gotta stop. Yeah. So on hard surface, you want the gear back to where when you tip it over, it stays tipped over. Going on a tail dragger, and you can get like 85% of the weight on the main gear. They handle ground handle so much better, especially on landing, because you know you don't have P factor or anything on landing, but once they start to ground loop or spin around, they're going. And if you don't have any air too, you got to have a lot of air going over the rudder to make it effective. And there's airplanes like the old Fokker triplane, the DR1s. Those things, the whole vertical fin was the rudder. You had no fin for it to hook to, and the fuse back there is very little. So the whole fuselage on it was blotted the rudder out until it got up. And if you notice, if you look at pictures, they had handles on the wings. They had a ground guy. The tail come up pretty quick on him, but he'd run along and keep going straight. And
wow.
But you got to have the rudder and the slipstream and the air going over for it to work. But once you get the momentum and the tail sliding around, and if the gear is way far forward, it's a good example. I just read it here a while back. Is a shopping cart. You're at the grocery store. As long as you push them straight, you can push them, and the handle at the back, they go straight. You turn it around and try that. It's going to go all over the place, and that's kind of the same thing. You got, you don't have any control. But
so if you got the gear in the right place, maybe a little bit of toe into the gear, the Cub will be pretty manageable. Ease up into the throttle, let it get rolling down the runway, make sure you're nice and stable, you got some control with the rudder, you got enough air moving over the rudder where you've got directional control, and just let it lift off.
how would you adjust tone on most of them, like your aluminum stuff there? You can't very well twist
Crescent wrench
Oh, yeah.
and a pair of vice grips.
You gotta put it in a vise and do it.
Yeah, or a vice. Just give it a little twist. Just a tiny bit. It doesn't take really much.
Usually try to do it on a plane, you bust them off. The plane, how they run them gear.
Yeah. A vice in the shop is a good way to do that. Just a little bit of a tweak will help. But tail draggers are fun, but they can be a little touchy.
What about the caster and camber? Is that, you want it run straight up and down, or?
Airplane don't care.
It doesn't matter that much, really.
It's running just a little bit on the runway anyway, not a
Yeah.
whole lot.
The toe end's a more important thing. You can see planes with the gear kind of splayed out, and maybe some of it's splayed in. It's either more splayed out than the other direction. But as long as you've got good contact with the runway and you get a little bit of toe, it'll be a pretty stable set of gear.